Well, welcome back to these constant contact videos. Today we're going to continue in this kind of systematic theology as we think about what does the Bible talk about or say about certain things. And last week we talked about what does the Bible say about creation. And this week I'd like to narrow in a little bit, both this week and next week, about what does the Bible say about humanity, and primarily focus on Genesis 1 through 3. So the first chapter of Genesis is known as narrative or historical narrative. The narrative is very straightforward, going from one day to the next, giving us broad strokes on how God created and in what order. I mean, through day 5, though, it seems like God is using a pretty wide-haired brush to create these large and broad strokes that gives us quite a bit in just 5 days of what creation and what this picture or creation is going to look like. But when we get to the 6th day, the artist narrows down to the main characters of the story, where we are told in Genesis 1:26 through 30 the following: Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals of the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant through the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, the small animals that scurry around the ground, everything that has life." And that is what happened. As we move from chapter 1 to chapter 2, some scholars suggest that there is a certain repetition. In fact, in some Bibles, there's a subheading of chapter 2 that even calls it a second account of creation. Yet, in chapter 2, we move from historical narrative to a more personal account of God's relationship, his unique relationship with humanity. In chapter 2, we see the Bible begin to set humanity apart from the rest of creation in such a unique way. In chapter 2 alone, we see just a few aspects of how God created humanity, and I think this is worth taking just a few and lifting them up. The first one is that God creates stewards. In the second half of Genesis 2:4 to the first half of verse 5, the New Living Translation puts it this way: "When the Lord God made the earth and the heaven, neither wild plants nor grains were growing on the earth." So, to look at the Westminster Confession, one of our guiding confessional documents for our denomination, it says that God is the primary cause of all of creation. And then he sets into motion secondary causes, could be as a simple concept as gravity. He sets the law of gravity into motion. It's going to work a certain way every single time simply because God created it to do so. God doesn't need to be actively involved in the notion of gravity. Gravity is going to act by certain rules. In the same way, God creates humanity as a type of secondary cause to steward and nurture the earth. Or as God told them in chapter 1, "Govern the earth, reign over all that I have created." So this gives humanity a certain responsibility that is far more meaningful and intentional than the rest of creation. I mean, if you think about the rest of creation, or you think about how rabbits multiply so much, they're really good at being fruitful and multiplying. But the ecosystem itself can break down. If there are no predators and too many rabbits, then you have one problem. If there are too many predators and not enough rabbits, that will create a whole nother problem. So, yes, we are told that humanity is called to be fruitful and multiply, but more importantly, they are given this secondary cause function, that they are called to guide and direct and watch over all of creation, to be stewards. Second, and something we've talked about before, is humanity is only complete through both Adam and Eve, or as the Hebrew says, through Ish and Isha. It is not good that Adam should be alone, and to be more fully reflect the image of God, male and female are created in God's image. Humanity is also totally free with one exception. God tells Adam and Eve as he places them in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it, that you may eat freely of the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die. The Westminster Confession tells us that after God had made all other creatures, he created humans, male and female, with reasonable and immortal souls, endued with knowledge, righteousness, and true holiness after his own image, having the law of God written in their hearts, and power to fulfill it, and yet under a possibility of transgressing, being left to the liberty of their own will, which was subject to change. Besides this law written on their hearts, they received a command not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which while they kept, they were happy in their communion with God, and had dominion over the creatures. To this day, this is where the Reformed and Presbyterian understanding of the creation and fall makes the most sense to me. One of the best criticisms I have heard of the Christian faith is, if God is all-powerful and all-knowing and he is completely sovereign, why would he have created humanity if he knew that humanity would sin? Well, before Adam and Eve sinned, this is the only time in all of history that they are completely free in their faculties to both choose correctly while also being tempted. Of course, with Christ, we are told that he was tempted, but he did not sin. Adam and Eve were tempted, but they sinned. There are some other traditions that might suggest that Adam and Eve had a sense of infancy, that they somehow had young minds in adult bodies. But this is a very strange concept, because if this were true, it would be quite strange for God to trust humanity with creation and stewardship if they were somehow unable to do what God created them for. It seems like this is reading something into and over the text that simply is not there. Others might ask, why would God create the tree in the first place? To which it seems that God creates with the intention to share himself or his deity with all of creation. Part of sharing his deity with creation would include the knowledge of God and equally the ability to reject God, or what we also might call the knowledge of good and evil. God's first prohibition was to tell humanity to stay away from this particular tree and its fruit. It is awfully strange that Adam and Eve have the entire creation at their fingertips, but they are still drawn to that which they cannot have. In such a scenario, if God is culpable for what happens next, then he is only culpable by being God, because he is all-knowing, which he knows both good and evil. Yet if humanity is completely free and the serpent is so very cunning, then this leads to the temptation. Ultimately, it leads to Adam and Eve's sin. And then ultimately, that leads to broken fellowship that will define humanity's existence from this point forward. Next week, we're going to get a little bit more into humanity and the fall, looking at how God offers grace and mercy, even though he was not privy, even though there was nothing in him that suggested he would need to do so. I hope that you would join us then. As for this week, pray that you have a great week, that the beginning of your summer is going very well. I hope that we can check in regularly with these videos, and I will see you next week. Have a fantastic week. Love you guys. Hope to see you very soon.